Good morning to all of you. Once again, for the organizing committee, it's a pleasure to greet you on this last day. So now we have the second session of urban management and GIS technology. So we have with us Professor Boris, Gregorio Gaisbord, and Alejandro Pagés Tuñon, who have 20 minutes each for their presentation and 10 minutes for questions and answers. Part of my job is to tell you or give you the resume of the presenters, but when we have this quality of presenters, it's easier to do because many of you already know our speakers. So let me introduce Dr. Boris Gaisbord, who is the current director of LEAD Mexico. He has a PhD in social geography from the London School of Political Science, and we'll give him the floor because we know he has a lot to tell us and we're not giving him a lot of time. So go ahead. Well, thank you very much for having invited us. In part, our presentation obviously has to do with urban management, and it has to do more than anything with the use of information technology and the possibility of using that technology. So certain practices are modified, in this case, work practices at companies. So the purpose of implementing or inducing the adoption of these sorts of practices has, among other things, a broader benefit than the work relationship between the businessman and the employee. And this is the possibility of introducing into the policies and strategies of mitigating emissions from transportation, which I understand that it represents 20% or so, 20-something% of total emissions. This implies more than adopting other transportation methods. It's to try to find the non-mobility as part of the strategy. So this is a collective project. I appreciate José Luis González, his presence here, and I'm going to be asking him some things during my presentation so that we can complete everything that we want to tell you. This is a project. Oh, he's breaking up. Okay, he's breaking up, but I think he's, okay, I lost him. Okay, so it's happening in Mexico and Buenos Aires, and estoy perdiendo audio. One of the, no, oh God, no lo estoy oyendo. Okay, I don't have audio, I'm sorry, I can't hear him. I think they're going to switch his microphone. Okay, I can't hear him. I have no audio. I'm not connected. Sorry, I can't hear him, so I can't translate. No, lo siento, pero no tengo audio. Okay, here we go. For different reasons, there are different reasons why we are proposing this practice. The analysis of the practice entails the possibility that companies adopt the practice and have the possibility of carrying it out, and that the employees also accept a proposal to work at home. There are studies that we have reviewed and that indicate that it's not a usual, or rather it's not a daily practice, but it's rather there are some days where the worker stays home and works from there, and other days where they are present at the actual premises of the company. And I'd also like to tell you that this practice has two steps or two phases. One, or rather two scales, two phases, one that's intrametropolitan and another scale that's interurban. So it's on two different scales. So the communication and information technology is used to substitute the possible journeys from one city to another. And the connection is made at the company, or you create a communication network. And the other scale is more of a complementary one. So in the first case, at the inter scale, it's a substitute, and at the intra scale, it's a complement. So our objectives are to quantify the impact, to analyze the situation. We carried out a survey and interviewed people at companies. We identified companies that do practice teleworking, as it's called, and we think that we saw that the companies that provide services to producers are the ones who do it most, but big corporations in their white-collar sectors also do this, what they call teleworking. So it isn't only the subcontracting or outsourcing sectors, but also the big manufacturers who, at the administrative level and R&D level, et cetera, they can use this practice. Then we tried, or we did an estimate of the potential of implementing teleworking to see what would be the impact in terms of non-mobility. One of the fundamental issues at this scale, and that is in the literature, and that there is a bouncing or boomerang level. In other words, I stay home and I turn on all of my sound equipment and my coffee maker. It's on all the time. And then what I'm saving in terms of generating or using energy and generating pollution is reduced because of the fact that I'm at home and I'm using all of these devices and I'm using energy. So I reduce the impact, the positive impact that the economy of scale when you have a coffee machine that serves very many people than one that's just for me. And another thing that happens in the family environment is that when the car of the employer or the worker is idle at home, and also the possibility that not all workers, not all employees use an automobile. About 30% of employees at these companies use a car, a private car, and 70%, well, it's more or less like the distribution in the metropolitan area. That's more or less the distribution between public transportation and private. It's about 70-30. So let's continue on. I've more or less defined, well, we haven't properly defined what teleworking means, but I'd like to go on to the next slide. Yes, okay, so this is the context. The idea of non-mobility, of not moving, of putting into practice this way of working, which, as I say, is a complementary. It's interesting because we think from the outset that perhaps the impact obviously may not be very big in figures, but in terms of quality, yes, it can be very significant because for different technical reasons, the metropolitan transportation system has some key strategic points in terms of traffic congestion, bottlenecks, et cetera, et cetera. So let's say that the marginal cost of incorporating another car into the system could be greater at some point than the average cost of having the cars theirs, in terms of time used, in terms of the generation and use of emissions. So that's on the one hand. And on another hand, the other technical issue is that the metropolitan space is not a space that is single-centered, where there's a single center where all of the companies are in this downtown and the rest of the metropolitan space is residential. That used to happen maybe in the 30s or the 40s, but it no longer happens. It doesn't happen now. So the journeys are not centrifugal, they're lateral, and it's fairly complicated, the whole system of traveling and that people, the journeys that people make within the city in cars. So this also implies to think about that one should think about that, of course, there is a relative concentration of jobs and a relative dispersion of places where people live. But the pattern is not necessarily a center and periphery, so it's not centripetal or centrifugal. So we're talking about over 21 million journeys per day, where a little less than half have to do with getting to work. So we're talking about half, let's say about 9 million, and really we're talking about 4 million of journeys there and 4 million back. So it's round trips. So we're talking about a population or a universe. Well, of those 3 times 15, no, 3 times 5, 15, where we're talking about 1.5 million more or less are vehicles, even if they say that there are 4 million cars in the city, but if there were 4 million on the streets, we would all be just standing there, so we wouldn't be moving. So, for instance, if there are 50 or 60,000 taxi cabs and 20% are not driving one day. So the thing is that I don't know, Jose Luis, but I figure that approximately about 2 million cars every day are circulating around the city, are driving around. So we're doing or creating a typology of possibilities of the journeys that can take place in the metropolitan area. Next slide, please.
We have the percentual distribution of how these trips are carried out. We are just considering half or a little less than half the volume of trips, and out of this half, it's about 30%, although we are also estimating savings and energy and emissions when an employee chooses to use a public transportation. So we're including all these workers as well. So we generate this map from the origin destination survey conducted by INEGI in Mexico City in 2007. This is the most recent origin destination survey, and we're presenting, as you can see, there is some sort of concentration pattern of destinations, which is the working places that are apparently concentrated in Mexico City. And if we thought about a matrix, probably in Mexico City being origin and destination, it would be too dense. And Estado de Mexico to Mexico City would also have a certain load, but the other way around, it would be lighter. But the distribution in the map at the left shows more dispersed distribution of places of origin, which is the households. So this is an indicator that would be the specialization ratio for employment, and it is those places which attract the most trips. I cannot see clearly what it says, but we are including actual figures for emissions by different activities. So we can see with the red circles, we are indicating to the left one that is very important, which is the generation of electrical energy, including a balance in the use of electricity. If we're in the office, if we are people that are using energy in the office with sound equipment devices, coffee makers, elevators, and the balance if we stay at home. Despite the scale economy that it entails sharing the use of certain devices and certain sources of energy, well, even with that, we have a positive balance if we stay at home, and it affects the general balance. And well, about the methodology, the bouncing effect, we have already mentioned. I have mentioned some important things about it. The other technical aspect of this study has to do with the distribution of our trips. When we're talking about general terms, I mean, in general, we all know that this idea about peak hours that, well, is part of the past, because now the peak hour, it lasts 8 hours. So depending if you're traveling to your office, we have a peak hour, and also if you're going to school, because you have the entrance and exit hours, and 30 or 40% of our trips are distributed along our daytime. So we would have an important reduction in the number of vehicles and trips, and especially in peak hours. And we need to analyze this when we are studying our trips to our offices. Another thing that I find interesting about our project is the difference between men and women. We combined our methodologies and made a quantitative analysis, and we analyzed the survey and also qualitative analysis. We conducted some interviews to men and women. And it's interesting what we saw, because there's a very slight difference in terms of profile, training, and education and family status between men and women. However, women have different purposes to go into the teleworking model. Women always mention family. I mean, their relationship with their children and their relatives at home. While men are more focused on their own satisfaction and well-being. They choose this telecommuting because they want to have more free time, they want to be relaxed, and women choose this option because they have family responsibilities. There is a subtle difference that is very interesting when we analyze those factors. But this, according to my peer demographers, they think that the change of structure, considering the age of the metropolitan population, we would see in the next 10 years an absolute deficit of individuals that are going to take care of the elder. And another important aspect with this telecommuting and attending to our family responsibilities, well, I am talking about this with entrepreneurs and businessmen, and they will eliminate the possibility of offering this model because they will think that people will take care of other things other than their work. But the fact is that productivity in this model is quite high. So it's important to have individuals in our families that are taking more or paying more attention to the elders, and in some areas, in low-income areas, low and middle-income areas, a very high percentage of the population, I don't know for what reasons, but they have to visit or have to go every week. They tell us that they have to visit the doctor for different medical reasons at least once a week. I don't know if it's the case of all of us here. If you visit the doctor every week, when you have young children, that is very common. But that was very interesting to see the difference, the slight differences that I mentioned between men and women. This is the last part. We weighed with this information what it would entail to have this bouncing effect and the average of trips and the use of gasoline per week or per day, and how much this costs using or not using your car or using public transportation instead, in terms of per capita consumption of gasoline and the proportion with CO2 emissions. And with that, we did an estimate of in 2 sectors of the metropolitan area that we think would be acceptable or prone to the introduction of this telecommuting practice. So we conducted this estimate about what would be the volume of jobs to producer services and those for wholesale companies, and we did this estimate to see what it would represent in terms of the total emissions or energy consumption, specifically for gasoline, or savings in electricity at home. Or at other locations. And this little map shows the distribution pattern for jobs in the metropolitan area and the places of origin of different workers in the metropolitan area to estimate an average of trips in the morning and in the afternoon. And it's about 50 kilometers. But in this small sample, we had some workers that live in Metepec or in Toluca and who come to Mexico City to their job. Or if you take a bus from Mexico City to Toluca, you will see that there's a very important volume, especially on Mondays, because many of this working population travels. We have a comparison among these wholesalers and services companies, and we are being quite conservative in this estimate. It's about 50,000 tons. Of CO2 is probably not too much for a metropolitan volume. But to conclude, I would like to highlight the importance of something that I mentioned at the beginning, the marginal cost that what this entails. This is an example. If we're in a cruise, in the crossing, where 2 avenues are crossing and someone runs a red light or a yellow light, and we do it and we generate a bottleneck, that would be the marginal cost of adding 1 more car to the system to the transportation and metropolitan transit systems. Thank you.
What does that mean?
This was a very interesting presentation. I would like to ask you to please ask the questions directly to Dr. Boris at the end of this session. Now we will give the floor to Alejandro Pagés, the actual director of the regulation and the Mexican Regulation and Competence Center and representative of National Mexican Territory. He has a degree in public administration from the Public School of Economics. And well, just to be brief in this presentation, we give the floor to him. Thank you. I would need to see what kind of audience we have. I see that we have geographists, environmentalists, researchers, cartographists, and it's very interesting to see this audience considering that my presentation is a public policy, but I will try to emphasize those topics that may be relevant to you. What we want to say is how to conduct integrated cadastre and information registry, because we need to see the problems that we face and the impact that we have when we talk about an information system of this sort that includes territorial information. Of course, it has a territorial impact, and everything that has an impact on a territory is relevant to geographists and environmentalists, because it has a direct impact in the development of some public policy on this matter. So why should we think about a system like this? Because there's a very important institutional problem. We have a great dispersion of territorial institutions. There's no systemic approach, and this carries different problems. We have many property regimes along our territory that are managed by different levels of the government without any coordination. We have public property, private property, social property. Social property may be rural or urban, and it's managed by different entities and organizations at municipal, state, and federal levels. Property rights in public registers are still managed by some federal entities, and municipalities manage the cadastre, the local cadastre. So this doesn't flow into one same organization, although there are some integrated models at an international level. At the national level, the model has always been a separate entity. And this separation between registries and cadastres, I've always said, what does a cadastre mean? I mean, it has an origin. Its etymology means registry. So there's no sense in talking about the difference between a registry and a cadastre when the cadastre registers. However, they register different things on one same territorial delimitation. That's the curious thing about this. This historical separation between public registry and cadastre has, of course, affected urban policies and have an important impact in the environmental policies in our country. So an important step for this beginning is the idea of this new administration system was the creation in this federal presidential period of a new ministry. The ministry, if you can please move forward in our slides, is the Agrarian and Urban Development Ministry that comes from this systemic idea. So the idea starts with this fundamental unit that should be managed through public and entities. It's the piece of land, the land. In order to work on the idea of this piece of land, we should have the same information in all entities, in all those entities that require this information. So after this piece of land, we have different layers until we get to the territory of the country itself, but the main unit will be the piece of land. So for any public policy exercise with an impact on society, we should always focus on this territorial aspect that would ensure long-term success. I'm not saying anything new, but I'm just trying to set the context of where we're heading. So the big problem that we see is that with this information, we have a great, important differences in our different sources of information. Public registers and cadastres do not match, and it is an ancient problem, and we have a history of this, the limitation of a piece of land in a map that is drawn by any professional with a deed of property may see that you can see where its boundaries are delimited without the gradients, without the specific position or the identification of this piece of land. And this is a legal reality. While on the cadastral side, we have a geographic, technical reality that is different and that identifies the piece of land, but it doesn't necessarily says the truth that the owner should know. So that difference can make us have, if we move 1 degree, this corner of a piece of land, it will change completely its polygon and all the information under which it is registered. And we see those differences all the time in our registries. And the legal reality prevails. And so we have to do something about this. We're talking about a problem that represents almost 25 million properties, many of them with some irregularities and without the appropriate registers. And this problem generates important economic consequences. I've always said this, we have not conducted precise estimates because we don't have information, but just at a glance we can estimate that if we just corrected one problem of this property right problems with identification of this different pieces of land, we could add 1 percentage point to our GDP. And without the appropriate reform, structural reform, and without all the different demonstrations that this entail, we will not be able to have this for each one of our states. So we would go to also the topic of informalities and solving tax issues, because all of this informal properties, of course, affect the tax collection. So this would also be a benefit. So the idea is to have a national information system, including public registers and cadastre. And with this, we have been working in different objectives. We have strategic goals to integrate this information, and we start first with the idea of linking this two different sources of information, but this was modified so as to work into an integration that is more radical for this information. And why thinking about this integration? If registering and cadastre are the same, there are some internationally used models where public registry includes the cadastre and the cadastre includes the public registry. So it doesn't seem useless to think about a legal regime as ours. Of course, this integration has different phases. We can talk about a legal integration in terms of processes, and of course, information and processes are really important in the creation of the system. But we have to do some work in institutional policies. I'm not going to elaborate on modernization, but it's an essential element with which we should work and where we incorporate IT and the geomatic work to develop all the tasks that we require for this administration system. But we cannot ignore the third part, that is to incorporate the creation of a subsystem for territorial management. This subsystem will be described in detail. if we talk about, let's just say, doing some allegoric mention to this, we are mentioning two different languages and philosophies, but on a same common purpose. How can we do this? Well, just with the use of an idea that is very simple, that is building this integration and starting to work on the need of making all these functions interact. And one other benefit that we see with this option is that we can serve one same individual through for the same property and for the same person, two services integrated into one same function. So as we said, starting with this linking idea, we started to work with professional researchers from the Geo Center dedicated to geomatics, specialists in this, and some IT specialists from Infotech in order to define a conceptual model. This is one of the principles on which we are working. A legal context, plans and project, territorial organization, and finding a model that will allow us to integrate all of this information. So we started to think about the bigger picture, the biggest picture, not only registry and cadastre, but also in managing the entire territory through the different users and information providers. So we got with the idea that we have to work in everything, not only working, not working as one same institution, but in this new territorial governance models where we have a co-participation of different users and information providers to form what we would call the first IDE in a federal entity. You know, the IDEs are part of a national project to create new information system, and this is through the use of a meta language. And this meta language is included in these IDEs, which are the fundamental units that should be registered in public registers, cadastres, and through other urban development and environmental institutions through their own information systems. And then we go to the next branch, and that with this, it makes a lot of sense to us to adopt this conceptual model towards a more operational flow. And then we think that we need to work on this information in these different groups that would converge in one same through the IDE mechanism. And as we started to create the structure of this information, they should go through the different procedures as requested by the user so that the validated information could be corrected and linked and integrated to registry and cadastre system with the participation of all entities. So this spaghetti took us to think that in our everyday work we could work with some certainty, and because what we couldn't do is to go through registration in books or this ancient and obsolete system towards an IT system where we could deposit all this trash into the new technological system. We had to validate all that information to make sure that it was accurate. So because at the end, the purpose is to provide legal certainty to people and users and citizens in general. So we couldn't give that leap without making sure that the operative flow would give us this legal certainty. So we found through some great philosophers of this geomatics and geography that are here with us, which we pretty much appreciated thinking about the mechanism, and we saw a mathematical solution, something that is PN key It's maybe new for you, or maybe many of you already knew it. But this key is a model that gave us a way out. It's a temporary time and space model that allows us to have the information that we may need with a clear reference that has a very important use, and it represents a lot of advantages. And this territorial unit gives us a great advantage. What would we have? What do we have when we have this key? It's a table that says that we can move this property, make some physical changes. They have properties have a life cycle. We know they can be divided, they can be fractioned, they can even grow. Paraphrasing, we would say it is born, it grows, and it reproduces. And it can also disappear. But all that information is not useful because it doesn't generate certainty. With the inclusion of this key, we can update the situation of the piece of land, keep its history with accurate information. And what do we do with this tool? It's a unique identification code that is not able to be repeated. It's unique, and when we georeference it, we use an algorithm by Chebyshev, and in this algorithm, what we do is that this 3D plan with this algorithm becomes a straight line. It becomes a binary information system that is highly efficient in terms of information. It cannot change the attributes of the things of things that are changed in property, but we keep history without an additional cost. The marginal cost is really marginal. So with this sophistication, we saw that we could generate the necessary attributes that we could require: tax information, cadastral information, information about owners, or anything that would be relevant. And any other information that could be useful. So there is a parent and a child key. So when we segregate it, we can segregate it in different variables. And when we merge it in one. And all this information is added through this PN key. So this can be segregated in 3 fractions, be merged into a 4th one, can be subdivided in another 4 or 6 or 19 or in whatever number we need, and each one will have their own key or code, and the previous one will be kept and part of the history that for legal certainty is fundamental. And it allows us to add a series of points in the different layers of information that we may have, so that we can start to draw the unit that we need to reach. I didn't mention that it includes irregular and regular centers. And if it's regular, well, we just have one centroid. But if we have irregularities, we have several. And we find the optimal or the largest in this irregular property. And this allows us or avoids us from losing some details. For in geometric matters, it's a key that is easy to use. And this means that through geographic and cartographic systems, it's relatively easy to use it, to reproduce it, and to do it. Nothing is for free, as they say. to do it, the only effort is that you have to conduct some technical inspection and verification of the property, where you have to conduct the appropriate measurements with high technology instruments, position them geographically, but well, we have to start to be clear about the use of the territory in our country. If you're members of INEGI or if you have been, then, well, you may ask why are you using a new one if we already have a CURT code? Because we have found that this code has some disadvantages compared to the code that we are proposing. The CURT code, among other technical features, has the particularity that may not be useful because of not falling into the property, or when there are certain elevations or heights in some properties, and we have the same for all the apartments in one building, for example. And as one of our researchers would say, it's difficult to consider when a typical case like a parking lot with ramps, we will never be able to classify them with a territorial code like the one INEGI uses, and there are many other considerations like that. The great advantages that we have with this key is that we can generate all the attributes or drag all the attributes. We're seeing how we can use these different cartographic and geographic systems and where we're heading. And all this to get to using this PN key as one of the fundamental aspects to build an integrated system, a comprehensive system, to have a unique identification of the property during its entire life, with the different attributes according to the function for which it may be required. This uniqueness attribute allows us to have some criteria that we may have on the same entity, and they may be unified in just one with this key, and we would eliminate the most relevant differences that today generate a lot of problems, from a sale transaction that may be regular on a different piece of land or property to really expensive trials about properties, ecologic reserves, or other territories that right now do not have a clear definition in terms of property rights, simply because the information that we have is not consistent. So all of this is useful for a national territorial information system that would serve for multiple public policy purposes.
And this brings us basically to the construction of this national information system regarding cadastres and all of the information that's useful for purposes of the territory. For the first time, we have the possibility of creating a single registry of different types of property that will enable us to have the tools to correctly define public policies that will have environmental effects, economic effects, and all sorts of effects, and will bring down squatting and other social effects. So it has a lot of advantages regarding the issues that we're trying to resolve. Thank you very much. Thank you. We have time for one question.
Thank you. My name is Bill Watt. I'm from Australia, and I would like
I can't hear him. His mic isn't connected to my earphones.
as you were considering the impact of work from home type procedures,
No puedo escuchar al señor porque su micrófono no está conectado a mis audífonos.
a significant reduction of staff in an area on the service industries, both transport and coffee shops and food outlets and so on and so forth, in relation to how that will impact upon the general economy as well. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to answer in Spanish. No, I'm not. Yes, the literature really indicates the environment, the surroundings. So we would have to do some research, a detailed investigation to see what happens with the workers and the employees at companies and the using of facilities and services in the surrounding area of where their workplace is, and then compare that to the services that are provided around where he or she lives. I don't know if I understood the question correctly and if I'm answering you. We didn't do that. But nor did we, for instance, we haven't really looked at the possibility of having intermediate centers of workers that are not alternatives to the actual or the workplace per se. We haven't looked at that either. But the possibility, let's say, of estimating the rebound effect on the system would include or should include what you're talking about, what you're mentioning, and we should, or rather, it should estimate what you're mentioning as regarding the services in the surroundings, in the surrounding area. Okay. Well, with that, we will conclude this session. I would ask us to give a very warm hand to our presenters. And in the name of the organizing committee, we would like to give you a token of our appreciation. Thank you for your contributions and your effort at this international conference.